It's a video special from the Mossad files. I'm Dan Raviv, and in our weekly audio podcast, we look at the strategic challenges facing Israel and the Middle East. They are, of course, complex and intertwined. On this video special, we will talk in particular about Iran and how the Israelis and Americans attacked Iran and how Iran is likely to respond. A clear expert on that joins us. Suzanne Maloney, you're Vice President and Director of the Foreign Policy Program at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. And you've written an article in Foreign Affairs called Iran's, I'm missing the word desperation. Help me with the title of your article. I'm sorry.
The title is Iran's Dangerous Desperation, What Comes After the 12-Day War.
Yeah, what comes after the 12-day war, as you say. So as you know, any listeners and viewers of the Mossad files know, Israel finally did it. After years of threatening, on Friday, June 13th, Israel bombed mostly nuclear facilities in Iran and some other targets. And then the U.S. joined in 9 days later, and President Trump rapidly said, that's it, ceasefire, the nuclear program is obliterated. And he said, Suzanne Maloney, he said, in effect, Iran wouldn't dare to go back to a nuclear program because they know that we would come back, a threat the U.S. would bomb again. Your article makes a very different prediction. How would you put it?
Well, I think that, it was a very successful military operation, first launched by Israel and then joined by the United States. It did significant damage to the infrastructure that Iran has built up over many decades, but particularly since the Trump administration in its first term walked away from the nuclear deal that had been concluded between Iran and a number of world powers, including the United States. The Iranians have assembled now a fairly sophisticated system that was producing very close to weapons grade uranium, enriched uranium. And that, I think, genuinely presented a threat of a quick possible turnaround to a nuclear weapon and precipitated the Israeli attack and then the American decision to join. I think my concern is that it's very clear that some elements of Iran's nuclear program remain intact, that in fact that it may have some stockpile of more highly enriched uranium. It has the capacity in terms of a fairly well-developed scientific base to reconstitute elements of its program, not overnight, but over time, and that it no longer has an incentive to cooperate with the international community, particularly the UN agency that was charged with verifying and inspecting Iran's commitments under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that there might now, in fact, be an incentive in terms of sustaining the Islamic Republic, the regime, the post-revolutionary regime in power, to try to move quickly towards a weapons capability, which to date, the intelligence community has assessed that Iran was not, in fact, moving quickly toward weapons capability. So, what I think many others are concerned about is that the success operationally of the attack left us in a strategic position where we might actually be closer to a bomb today than we were prior to the strikes.
I can tell you, Suzanne, that for more than a decade, when I would discuss with Israeli officials, including intelligence agency officials, how Iran would likely respond to being bombed, because Prime Minister Netanyahu for years said Israel might feel that it has to hit Iran. And so would it make Iran kind of give up its nuclear program, more or less, which is what happened with Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi dictator, after Israel attacked the Iraqi nuclear reactor in the 1990s? Or would it compel the Iranians to say, we need the kind of protection that North Korea has by having a bomb? And at least one Israeli intelligence official said to me, that is the million-dollar question, meaning that the Israelis wouldn't know because there's capabilities and there's intentions. And your article touches on both. The capability part is they may still have some highly enriched uranium, not 90% for a weapon, but maybe the 60% that they had achieved. The Israelis and some Americans think it was all buried. When Fordo was hit, when Natanz was hit, if there is any of that highly enriched uranium, it's way down there. So that's the capability area. So I wonder what you know or what you suspect. but the other side, the intentions, you seem pretty strong about that, that within the realm of Iranian revolutionary politics, you don't see the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, giving up the nuclear intentions. Again, they deny they were going after a bomb, but well, you don't see them giving up their nuclear capability, do you?
I think you're exactly right. We don't entirely know what the capabilities are today in the aftermath of the strike, in part because the Iranians did pass a law that indicates they will no longer cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency. There are efforts to bring the IAEA back to Tehran to try to negotiate some kind of a return to compliance with Iran's obligations under the NPT to, in fact, ensure that their nuclear program is only designed for peaceful purposes, and that is the role of the IAEA. And so it may be that we get the IAEA back in there, that the exquisite intelligence that Israel was able to obtain that helped contribute to the tremendous operational success, very quickly decapitating the senior leadership of Iran's military leadership, as well as a number of key nuclear scientists. That intelligence may enable us to, over time, develop a better understanding of exactly what they have access to and what is, in fact, inaccessible, buried under tons of concrete in the side of a mountain or elsewhere. But we know that, not every facility has been eliminated. We know that there were thousands of centrifuges, advanced centrifuges that Iran had developed but not installed, and we don't know the exact location of those. And so, that combined with the fairly sophisticated infrastructure that Iran had around the nuclear program built up over decades suggests that there is a pathway toward reconstituting the program. And in fact, Saddam himself sought to reconstitute his own program after the bombing of Osirak. The Syrians did not. That's a counterexample. The Syrians, in fact, abandoned their program after the 2007 strike that eliminated their nascent reactor. And so we don't precisely know, but I think we can look at the long track record of the Iranian leadership, their determination to stay in power, the lack of alternatives that they have to a nuclear deterrent. They saw over the course of this short campaign that their air defenses were essentially worthless, that their international relationships with world powers like China and Russia were also meaningless to prevent this kind of an attack. And a nuclear program that is sophisticated but hasn't, in fact, crossed the weapons line, I think does present a real, genuinely attractive alternative to a leadership that is determined to stay in power, that believes it's its obligation to protect the country by remaining in power.
I've seen kind of, and even before the 12-day war in June, I felt that the Iranians, in a way, were mirroring part of Israel's nuclear strategy on the public side. Israel has never confirmed or acknowledged that it has nuclear bombs, but the CIA and all intelligence agencies say, yes, Israel does. Probably more than 90 warheads. I've seen an estimate as much as 200, because as the Israelis are working on it, they've had lots of time and they're very good at technology, of course. And that apparently includes being able to weaponize, creating warheads for their missiles, for instance. Okay, that's the Israelis. But they didn't want to admit they had a bomb. Now, the Iranians, in kind of a mirror, said that there's a fatwa, even a religious decree, against having such a weapon of mass destruction. But sometimes I understand in the Iranian media, there'd be some experts speaking on a panel saying, oh, there's so many possible exceptions if it's absolutely required to defend the Islamic Republic. So how do you read this kind of nuclear ambiguity that Iran had adapted?
I think is an excellent and very interesting point, the mirror imaging between Iran and Israel in terms of seeking to maintain some sort of opacity about their declared status. In the case of Israel, that has, of course, meant that there isn't cooperation with the IAEA and with other agencies monitoring these sorts of things. For the Iranians, I think it is a recognition that if, in fact, they became a declared either a nuclear aspirant or nuclear power itself, they would in fact trigger additional strikes. And so the opacity has been part of their defense mechanism. But as you say, particularly over the course of the past year, as Iran's other weapons of mass destruction, its proxy network that it had erected and empowered over the course of many decades, that had become an important element of its power projection strategy and of its deterrence against an Israeli strike, was itself eroded by Israeli military successes in Lebanon and elsewhere, as well as by the collapse of the Bashar Assad regime in Syria. The Iranians began a much more public conversation about whether, in fact, they should move toward nuclear weapons capability as a means of preserving the regime and preserving what they see as Iran's sovereignty and independence. And that was coming not just from hardliners, but from relative pragmatists within the regime. And there has always been, or at least since 1989, some constitutional changes in Iran, an elevation of the expedience or the nation's interests over any constitutional or religious precepts. So this is a regime that has enshrined the idea that their national interests really will drive them to do whatever they have to do to stay in power.
Well, in your article, Iran's Dangerous Desperation, you're suggesting there's a real possibility that they will return to the nuclear program. And then, of course, Western intelligence agencies, including the Israelis, will assume that the goal is to have nuclear weapons, and the intel agencies will do everything they can to track that, to sabotage that, perhaps back to the shadow war we had. But even, well, let me put it this way. Did you conclude that it's highly likely that Iran might even declare that it's no longer going to be part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, not allow inspectors, and we're going for nuclear weapons? Any chance they would declare that?
I think that they're trying to steer clear of that line for precisely the reason we were just discussing, this preference for maintaining some opacity in order to avoid triggering further incursions by Israel, the United States, or the international community. They also recognize that there's really no other country in the world that would endorse an Iranian nuclear weapons status. They know that it would trigger a similar drive by some of their neighbors, including Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, others, to obtain or acquire or begin to develop a much more sophisticated nuclear weapons program themselves. So I think that, there are a variety of incentives that would probably keep the Iranians shy of, in fact, any kind of a declaration. But if the regime's survival came down to it, I think that that's certainly a possibility.
Okay, but they might not declare it, preferring the Israeli style ambiguity or opacity, being opaque. Now, again, we're talking a lot here about trying to figure out, divine the intentions of a supreme leader of the Iranian leadership. I can only imagine that Iran is trying to divine the intentions of the American president, right? Who blithely says we would return and we would bomb again, right? They must be trying to figure him out. So, as a professional, I know you've advised the United States State Department over some administrations in, I think, a nonpartisan way. I know you haven't been in the Trump administration. So, as an observer of foreign affairs, like, what does Iran make of these kind of threats by Mr. Trump that America might do it again and use the bunker busters again?
Well, I think they have to take it seriously. They were very much caught off guard by the June war, by both the Israeli attack and then the American decision to join. And so I think that, sort of recognition that they were taken by surprise, that they were compromised in terms of, Israeli intelligence penetration into Iran, will make them far more suspicious and far more skittish about the possibility of a return attack. But they also, I think, calculate that President Trump wanted to get in and out in terms of the U.S. military engagement with the 12-day war in June, that he will be loath to see the United States entangled in what could be a long and costly conflict if, in fact, this was something more than just some discrete airstrikes. If this involved a campaign that required boots on the ground, that is something that the president himself throughout his political career has inveighed against, and I think in many ways, tapped into the frustrations of ordinary Americans with the costs in both in financial and human terms of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan in a way that some mainstream politicians simply fail to appreciate. So, Trump has been relatively consistent on that point, and I think that combined with the larger interests of the United States in contesting the rise of China in the Indo-Pacific would make it unlikely that that Washington is going to jump headfirst into a sustained conflict in the Middle East. And the Iranians, I think, successfully read that.
Here's a way that Iran reminded me of North Korea from an American point of view. In his first term as president, when Mr. Trump met the North Korean leader, right, he tried to interest North Korea into becoming a peaceful, even pro-Western country almost, build resorts on the coastline, etc. And apparently North Korea's hardline communist dictator wasn't interested in the slightest. And then again, a few months ago, we heard from President Trump, all I need from Iran is no nuclear weapon ever. I want Iran to succeed. I want it to be a wealthy country. The people of Iran are good. Israelis were rather upset, by the way, Israeli officials, that Trump seemed to be ignoring the other things that Iran does, fueling terrorism and having those dangerous proxies. So all Mr. Trump ever really cared about was the nuclear. How did you react to that? And how would Iran react to this notion that the Trump administration could help make Iran rich and successful if they don't go nuclear?
I think it's unlikely that the Iranians would trust any commitments by the Americans. This is just, sort of anathema to the system and to the ideology that really does drive the leaders of Iran. But I think, in fact, it may be a canny way to try to create some space within Iran and some debate within Iran, because, of course, Iran may have a leadership that is choosing to go down a pathway that is very similar to North Korea, but the Iranian society is very, very different than North Korean society. There is just a much wider debate that exists even within the system itself, and certainly on the streets and among the people of Iran. And I think that, much as there was an opportunity early in the Iran-Iraq war for the international community to try to persuade the Iranians to end the war, the Gulf states in 1982 offered reparations to Iran if, in fact, it did not try to pursue the war into Iraq. The Iranian regime at that time declined, and it came at tremendous cost to the Iranian people and to the country itself. I think publicizing a generous offer for the regime to back away from this very dangerous pursuit of nuclear weapons may not succeed in tempting the regime to do that deal, but it will make it clear to the Iranian people and to those elements of the system that do want a different future, and they certainly do exist, that in fact there's a choice to be made. We know that Iran is in desperate straits economically, that there is a very urgent water crisis that is affecting the quality of life. We know that Iranians have come to the streets time and time again to express their interest in greater freedom and engagement with the world. I don't think we are on the precipice of regime change tomorrow, but I think that how we play this diplomacy could in fact create the opportunity for a different set of leaders to come to the fore. And President Trump could play a helpful role in that if in fact he creates that sense of an alternative pathway that is available to an Iran that is not pursuing the most deadly weapons.
All right, let's wind up our conversation with your answer, please, to, again, a question that I put to frankly, someone who was high up in the Mossad on a trip to Washington, and he was open to taking questions. And I said, so if you bomb Iran, what's the effect going to be? Is it going to make people more loyal to their regime, their government, or will Iran be so humiliated? And it turned out, as you said, their air defenses turned out to be worthless. The skies are open to the Israeli Air Force, and that the humiliation would mean people are really disgusted with their government. I think your foreign affairs article suggests you think it's the greater loyalty that's a stronger outcome, yes?
Well, I think in the near term, Iranians were distressed by, bombing that took place across the country and really did have a significant casualty rate for ordinary people, significant impact on life. And of course, the regime has intensified its repression in the wake of these strikes. I don't think that there is a long-term rally round the flag effect that is going to change the general apathy and disillusionment that ordinary Iranians have with this system. They simply haven't had a pathway at present to create political change, but that can't last forever.
So there are elements of both reactions. Some people will feel more loyal, nationalistic at least. Iran's been embarrassed and rah rah Iran. And there are others who would say, look, here's further evidence that the Islamic regime is failing us. Is that right? Both elements.
I think that's correct. Regime change doesn't happen at the barrel of a gun, and Iranians are traumatized by the destruction, but I don't think are going to come to the defense of a regime that has brought about this destruction.
Thank you so much. That's Suzanne Maloney, Vice President and Director of the Foreign Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. Your articles in Foreign Affairs, and I thank you so much, Suzanne Maloney, for joining us.
Thank you, Dan.
And thank you for watching this video special from the Mossad Files. A couple of quick notes on this date, Thursday, August 7th. There's a new story at ProPublica.org, that investigative news site. It's by me and Yossi Melman, Dan Raviv and Yossi Melman. It's about the Mossad spies inside Iran. That's right, the Mossad spies who launched that 12-day war in June by hitting targets inside Iran. We reveal they're not Israelis. That's right, foreigners, including, of course, Iranian dissidents, recruited by Israel, as the Mossad found that it didn't have to take the risk with Israelis. It was easier than they expected to get enough non-Israelis to be effective and reliable agents inside Iran. So we write about that at ProPublica.org, an article about the Mossad spies inside Iran. Also this past weekend, on August 2nd, there was an article by Yossi Melman and me, and that one about Israelis who are selling out their own country. An increasing number of Israeli citizens from all walks of life, mostly Jewish Israelis, taking money from Iranian spy agencies to do some forms of espionage inside Israel. Hundreds of people involved, according to Shin Bet, the security agency inside Israel. So that article is at airmail.news. Two articles by Melman and Raviv, and of course a reminder of our book. There it is, Spies Against Armageddon, Inside Israel's Secret Wars. You might be interested in the book as well. Thank you very much. I'm Dan Raviv. Till next time, and do catch our audio, the Mossad Files podcast.